and today is Thursday, August 20th. My name is Brian Zumwalt. I'm the director of the county's Office of Technology and Innovation. I'll be playing the role of technology moderator for today's virtual meeting. On the call with me is Don Crowell from the county attorney's office, who will be serving as process moderator. And before we go ahead and start the meeting, I'd like to do a quick roll call, make sure that we've got communications, and we'll start with Commissioner Eggers.
Good morning, Brian. I'm here.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Seal.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Commissioner Seal. Commissioner Welch.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, sir. Commissioner Long.
Good morning, Brian. I'm here.
Good morning. Commissioner Peters.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. And Commissioner Gerard.
Good morning, all.
All right, Madam Chair, you have a quorum. I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Okay, and Commissioner Justice will not be joining us this morning. Okay, I want to call this meeting to order. The first item on the agenda, of course, is citizens to be heard. So what do we have, Brian?
So at this time, if there are any members of the public that wish to be heard for agenda item number 1, citizens to be heard, go ahead and raise your hand if you're in the Zoom meeting, or hit *9 if you're on the telephone. And Madam Chair, it does appear we have about 7 or so people that would like to speak. The first person that wishes to be heard is Charmin Cree. Ms. Cree, if you'll go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Okay. Charmin Cree, 1761 Carlisle Street, Clearwater, 33755. Okay, so I just wanted to make a comment about the masks. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. So since this all started in March, I've been unemployed, so I've done a lot of reading and listening to videos, etc. So I'm just going to tell you my observations and conclusions based on everything I've read. And of course, more data comes in by the day because this is a worldwide event, and lots of people are putting in their input. So this is what I observed. COVID is not a deadly disease. The death rate, as reported, is lower than the seasonal flu. But in addition, the actual death rate is probably much lower because we now know that often the cause of death has been noted as COVID, but when people died of other conditions, etc. Test results are inaccurate. They are not to be trusted. Many false positives have occurred. People who have scheduled themselves to take tests have received notices that they tested positive, even though they never had a test. Every article and study I have read about masks say they do not prevent the spread of a virus. Virus particles are very tiny and can get through the masks. I always point to this, which is I was in the hospital for 4 days last summer with pneumonia. No one wore a mask, nor do they ever wear masks in hospitals unless they are in surgery. And let's say the masks do protect people. Well, then it should be your choice if you want to wear a mask. If you're wearing it and you feel it protects you, you are protected. You don't need anyone else to wear one in that case. But I think the standards from the past should always apply. If you're sick, stay at home. If you cough or sneeze, cover your mouth and nose. If you do want to keep the 6-foot, distancing in place, then you don't need the mask. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is Mr. Dave Waddell. Mr. Waddell, welcome back to the commission, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Honorable Chair, board, and staff, good morning, everybody. My name is David Waddell, D-A-V-I-D, W-A-D-D-E-L-L. I reside at 4835 164th Avenue North, Clearwater, Florida, 33762. Glad to see all you folks are here and doing well. Just want to comment on the convenience of these Zoom meetings. As you know, through the last 12 years, I've attended many meetings, and on a number of occasions, we were there till midnight, and I'm talking folks that were 80 plus years old. My gosh, the convenience of being able to have public input at this level, it gives you a sense of being part of the process. And as far as overflow, we had a couple of occasions where we had more than 200 people there and were sent down to the floor below, and it was really confusing. And I'm thinking, my God, with this technology, the input, and of course, you're going to get the full spectrum, but it's an opportunity. Gosh, no parking, don't have to get in a car, risk getting in an accident. I'm burning fuel, burning time. I get to sit here in my PJs and see what's actually happening with my county government. And I think that's great. I mean, I don't know what it costs, but to me, it's priceless. There was a time when I could have thrown a 50-pound backpack on and hiked the 12 and a half miles down there, but I'm barely able to get up and down my stairs anymore. So I want to encourage you to look at this for any of our board meetings that are have any fiscal responsibility. I just think that it's a great tool, and it gives us an opportunity to feel like we're really part of the process. And you know, I know that the boardroom, we packed that and we got standing room only most of the time. We've got to be really, really extra cautious right now because, you know, we've gained some ground. And I think that this in the toolbox will really help us in the long run. And I'm not talking, you know, after we get rid of this COVID thing. I don't really think we're ever going to get rid of it, to be quite honest with you. The earlier caller regarding masks, well, I can tell you right now, put a candle in front of you to test your mask. If you can blow the candle out, your mask is not effective. But if you cannot, and I have video of my buddy Richard on his birthday with his mask on, trying to blow his birthday candle out. And darned if he tried and tried and tried. And I said, Rick, you're wearing your mask. And sure enough, as soon as that mask came off, he made his wish. So I just want to encourage the board to continue with this tool. And I think you'll get a lot more feedback if the community is even aware of this. I'm not even certain how. I know there's a note in the agenda item that, you know, does state something regarding the virtual meetings, but a lot of people really don't understand it. And I just wanted to say, hey, you guys keep up the good work, and thank you for believing in our community, because it really is up to us. You guys can only do so much, and we know the state and the feds, well, we might as well be our own darn country because we're on our own.
Mr. Waddell, your time has expired, sir.
I want to thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker, I don't have a name. I just have initials PK. So PK, if you'll go ahead and unmute yourself, gives you first, last name, spelling, and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. PK, you'll have to unmute.
Sorry about that. Good morning.
Good morning.
Beautiful day in Florida. I'd like to talk about the mask mandates myself.
For the record, can you give us your name and address, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Mona Kelly, Kelly, 2265 Indian Avenue South, and that's Largo, Florida.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Okay, to the mask mandates. First point I wanted to make is that I don't think they consider people who really cannot wear a mask, number one. And it's rough to go to your doctor and sometimes explain to him why you can't wear one, because it could be from abuse, sexual assaults, that type of thing. And then you have to walk around with a note from your doctor saying why you can't wear that mask. That's very humiliating. Number two, I think that we're not also considering the isolation and the drug addiction and the alcoholism of people that don't want to go out because they can't or won't wear a mask. So they're isolated in their home. Case in point, I brought an 82-year-old friend to, excuse me, to vote on Tuesday. She had not been out of her house since March because she cannot wear a mask. But she went to vote because it's our duty to vote. And third, but not least, is the fact that if you want to wear one, wear one. It's America, the land of the free because of the brave. If you don't want to wear one and you're not sick, you're not vulnerable, you're not mixing in large crowds of people, why are we being forced to do that? The numbers from the CDC show that. The numbers have been skewed. Even Governor DeSantis mentioned it in one of his press conferences that he was going to check into those numbers. They're cattywampus. I mean, nobody's verifying them 100%. Even if you have a cold or the flu, you're going to test as a COVID-19 person. I had 5 friends go sign up, wait in line for an hour in the heat, didn't get in to be tested, but all got calls 2 days later that they tested positive. They were never tested. That is the God's honest truth. And I'm a Christian. I do not lie. 5 people I know personally. How many other people are there that we do not know about? So I'm really begging you guys to consider this. It's a catch-22 for people. And there's a lot of collateral damage there, you know, that I don't think people realize. I volunteer for a recovery program. We've lost 6 people since March to overdoses, to suicide. That's collateral damage for people that are usually healthy otherwise, but couldn't attend meetings, couldn't go into anyone's home or business to talk to them. They just had to deal with it on their own. So God bless you all. I hope you'll consider what we're saying today, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, there are 8 remaining speakers that wish to be heard. Our next speaker is Rick Watson. Mr. Watson, if you go ahead and unmute yourself, give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Thank you. My name is Rick Watson, 3376 Tarpon Woods Boulevard, Palm Harbor. I am the president of the East Lake Recreation Advisory Board. Some of you I know, Commissioner Seal, Commissioner Welch, Commissioner Long. I know we had a number of meetings a while back when we were attempting to get our tax money. So here we are 6 years later, and things are going well. But at our last board meeting, our East Lake Recreation Director, Mark Sanders, shared with us that FICSA, as most of you I hope know, FICSA is East Lake Recreation, East Lake Library, Palm Harbor Recreation, Palm Harbor Library. We had about $20 million in the budget out of the Penny for Pinellas budget. And out of that 20 million that we were hoping to get, we ended up with about 1.5 million. Now, first, I understand COVID has changed things and budgets change and things change. However, from 20 million to 1.5 million is quite distressing. East Lake Recreation, we were at about $3.5 million of requests. We ended up with 0 in the final budget. So very concerning, very upsetting. For those of you that have been up to our sports complex in East Lake, you'll know that for the past 6 years, our recreation director, Mark Sanders, has been working out of a dilapidated trailer that doesn't have a bathroom in it that functions. We desperately need a building up there, an office, a real true building, an office for Mark, a concession stand, some storage space in the building. And our new complex, I call it new, it's now 8 years. We built 2 soccer fields out at what we call the Meadows back in 2012. And we have no bathrooms out there, no building, no concession stand. Those are the 2 biggest items that we were certainly hoping to get done, but we were shut out. And it's very concerning. I know Commissioner Eggers is aware of the situation, and hopefully he can share with the rest of you the needs that we have up there at our complex. So that's really all I had. I hope if there's an opportunity to reconsider this and get us the funds we need for just the basic necessities up there of buildings and an office for our director, doesn't seem like a lot to ask. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is Dawn. I don't have a last name, so if Dawn, you'll go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Yes, good morning. Dawn Bowler, B as in boy, OHLER, 6678 54th Avenue North, St. Petersburg.
Thank you.
It was asserted last week that there is no manufacturing of numbers and the dashboard is an accurate assessment, but accuracy is in the eye of the beholder. The dashboard states we are closely monitoring the percentage of tests that come back positive. You claim science, but you can't establish a scientific or statistical fact, often inconsistent baseline. And in your position, you should not be making decisions based on your gut, but on concrete facts and evidence, which are as follows. According to the dashboard, we have tested 183,325, less than 18% of the population when factoring duplicate tests. And of that 18%, 90% have tested negative. I quote, "We had an exponential rise in cases in June. At 5,478, only 0.56% per population. And when it comes to hospitalization, how many are admitted for other conditions, as my grandmother was, but happened to test positive and are counted exclusively as COVID? 5 months we have heard lower the curve. Well, the week starting at July 12th, we had 2,617, July 19th, 1,688, July 26th, 1,637, August 2nd, 1,128, and August 9th, 881. As of August 15th, we have had a 99.25% decrease from the week of July 12th. And at 7,951 cumulatively, only 0.8% per population, and again, from 18% of the population. Would you not agree that basing calculations on anything other than population is an egregious discrepancy? Fact is, you're not trying to lower, you're trying to eradicate, to play God out of fear, especially having admitted the question of not knowing how the virus would affect you. You claim no intent, but the effect falls under constructive intent. You mentioned no death is acceptable, but your needle exchange program will certainly provide the tool for overdoses and death during a time considered a crisis. Furthermore, on April 7th, Dr. Burke stated if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death, as also happened with my grandmother this week. So as far as your questioning, if I was implying, no, I'm declaring, and I declare it from the highest rooftop, but my luck, I'd fall to my death and be counted as COVID. Ultimately, I think Thomas Jefferson said it the greatest, that government is best, which governs the least, because its people discipline themselves.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is Lenny Grissom. Lenny, if you'll go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Am I up on there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Lenny Grissom, Lenny Grissom, 225 5th Ave, Northeast St. Pete. Something.
Go ahead, sir.
What was the other?
No, go ahead. You're live with the commission.
Della had she told me yesterday or emailed me that she had sent all y'all the paper that I wrote. I hope you got it and read it, but my issue is with 5 letter M, which allows certain people to not wear a mask. And it's being totally disregarded by every corporation in Pinellas County. But the worst one is One Blood. For 40 years, I've been given blood and plasma. I had contacted with One Blood directly about plasma apheresis and platelet apheresis, which is about a 3-hour using 2 arms. Those will actually save people's lives within a couple of days. So when they transfer plasma, my blood, the plasma, to theirs, usually within 2 days, the virus is killed with them and they usually can leave. The problem we have is there's not very many people that are qualified to be able to do this. You have to be AB, you have to have good veins, and you have to be willing to lay there and not be able to move or do anything. Plasma is what saves people with the COVID. And then platelets is what saves people that have cancer. Those are the 2 major ones, but it also helps people with sickle cell anemia and high cholesterol. There are 2 links on the page that I sent you. They're feel-good type link. There's just a ton of YouTube stories on plasma and platelets. And I just picked 2 that were sort of short, but you can just go on YouTube and you can find as many as you want. I have been multiple weeks that I have not been able to give plasma or platelets to One Blood because they're blocking me, because they say we require, as a corporation, we require you to wear a mask. I said, no, I can't do that. I get massive headaches almost immediately. I start sweating profusely because what we breathe out of our nose is 98 degrees. And so what they are doing is they're ignoring you, Pinellas County, what page 5, number M says, and they are also taking away constitutional rights of folks because they are now mandating what I must do. This is something that needs to be addressed right away. The lawyer that wrote this should be, when I was talking yesterday, said he should be the person that looks at this and makes this correction. Lawyers are really great at trying to plug every hole they can. This is one that got missed. I also put in the paper that I wrote a very effective way to get this out to people, corporations. We have 24 cities.
Mr. Grissom, I'm sorry, your time has expired, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker, I don't have a name for. It's somebody coming in on a Galaxy 10 Note Plus. So if you go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Yes, good morning. My name is Jennifer Frazier, last name Frazier, 6731 Park Boulevard, North, apartment 127, Pinellas Park 33781. So basically, I'm concerned about the 211 process. So I was out of work for a few weeks due to COVID, and my apartment manager told me to reach out to 211 for rental assistance, which I did. Maybe 6 days in a row I tried to call. The one day I was on hold 4 hours, no answer. 6 hours, no answer. 3 hours, no answer. I text the 898-211 more than once for a 3-week period. I would get the 4 automated text messages back and then no response after that. So I have tried and tried and tried to reach somebody for 3 weeks now, and I have got nowhere. My apartment manager said she even reached out to someone higher up at 211, gave them my information. I still have yet to hear from anyone. So I don't know what other steps I'm supposed to be taking. It's a very bad process of trying to get assistance from them at all. That's basically my only concern. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan, you have that number.
Kat, did you get, I don't have the number. Kat, do we want to get it for the record, or do we want to take it offline?
I don't have a number or contact information, just her name, which is Jennifer Frazier from Pinellas Park. She just gave her address.
Okay, if we can get that number, we'll have staff follow up directly with her.
Okay, Jennifer, if you can stay on, I'll try to get with you maybe after the meeting. I don't know any other way that we could do it during the meeting though, without exposing her phone number.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. All right, Madam Chair, it appears we have about 5 speakers remaining. Our next speaker is Rob Posavec. Mr. Posavec, if you'll go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Good morning. It's Rob Posavec, Posavec, 572 Ozona Village Drive in Palm Harbor. I'm going to piggyback a little bit on the same subject that Rick Watson just spoke on. But by way of introduction, for those that may not know me, I've been involved with Eastlake Youth Sports for nearly the last 20 years. But from 2014 through 2018, I was on the FIXA board, and as chairman in 2018, I helped facilitate a process to prioritize our wants and our needs for funding that could be provided by Penny for Pinellas. Our directors, Mark, Erica, Jean, and Lois, whom you all know, evaluated the needs, analyzed the solutions, presented their recommendations. And the board over several months considered these recommendations. We visited the facilities, we discussed the projects, and ultimately came to a consensus on a prioritized list of these projects. As recently as December 2019, all of these projects appeared on the 10-year projects list. They were on the list in a timeline that was consistent with our board's recommendations at the time. Between then and now, however, there appears to have been a change, and frankly, I think it deserves some explanation. Specifically, the project that was put forward as the #1 priority was stricken from the list. Not pushed out to a future year, but completely stricken from the list. Other projects, while reduced or pushed out, stayed on the list, but the #1 project was deleted. I think we all understand that the penny funds have been negatively impacted by COVID, and that the timing of these projects would likely be delayed. But to completely eliminate our number one prioritized project without explanation, as far as I know, is troubling. The board members and the directors at the time put a lot of time and effort into that process, and I think deserves some explanation. But more importantly, I think the folks up here in North County really need these projects funded, as Rick mentioned earlier. So I'd simply like to ask that you take a look into this and help us understand exactly what happened. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have 4 speakers that wish to be heard remaining. Our next speaker is David Katsaros. Mr. Katsaros, if you go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Sure. Good morning. David Katsaros, David Katsaros. I'm at 1610 Pennsylvania Avenue, Palm Harbor. Thanks for having me on. I really like to talk a little bit about what some of the points from last meeting were about, Dr. Cho and Dr. Jameson and their comments about numbers being down because of the hurricane, which is very interesting. If you're not testing, of course, numbers are going to be down. But we're at about 5% positive rates. And I'm kind of concerned about how your decisions are affecting the school board's decisions. And why haven't the mandating of masks be lifted? At what number are you, or at what point will you lift the state of emergency? What numbers are you looking to accept? Do you arbitrarily pick a number? Is 1 death too much? No deaths? 100 deaths? 200 deaths? Like, what is that number that you can say, all right, the adults in the room can actually be adults and not have to wear a mask if they choose? If you have preconditions, which none of the statistics that we have show the preconditions of those admitted into hospitals or that were positive or that ended up in death. So why haven't you mandated those that have recovered from COVID, because there's been tens of thousands of them in Florida that have recovered from it? Why haven't you mandated giving convalescent plasma to those people? That's one thing. What's more important, convalescent plasma to somebody on a ventilator in a ICU bed, or me wearing a mask? So I think that's the other thing. And then why haven't we heard from doctors who have differing views to allow different perspectives to the ones you regularly have on? Balanced viewpoints is the best way to make decisions that affect the public. We need to hear both sides of every argument or scientific viewpoint. Our businesses, your constituents, our children need to be allowed to manage our businesses, our families without government intervention. You are here to serve and protect. Protecting us from the flu is not the definition of the protect you are sworn to. This flu is not an enemy invading from a foreign land carrying a gun. And since June 24th, you've mandated masks. Where is the cliff that we have jumped off of in positives? There hasn't been one. So for almost 2 months, we've been wearing masks, but yet we haven't seen the dramatic change in positives that we said we had been. And then ages ranging 0 to 14 since the pandemic started, there's only been 3 child deaths, reflecting 0%. Ages 14 to 24, there were 20 deaths that reflect 0% of the total. We don't see a 10% increase until the ages of 55 to 64.
Mr. Katsaros, your time has expired, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to go back to that one speaker, and I'm going to put up an email address on the screen so that she knows who she can go to for the 211 assistance.
Great.
Give me one moment here. This is the email address that we're asking you to go ahead and reach out to, bccagendacomments@mypinellasclerk.org. And the clerk will get over your information to Barry and to Della so we can get you further information on the 211.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next speaker, Madam Chair, is ADNAN. I'll go ahead and unmute you. And if you could give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. Adnan Campera, Longo, Florida. I just want to add on to some of the comments that were previously made by some of the citizens about the mask mandate. I just want to say that I appreciate that there are other people voicing their opinion, saying that it should just be optional, that we should just have the choice to wear a mask or social distance or even be in lockdown, especially if you're healthy. I'm 27 years old. I actually haven't felt better since the lockdown. I've actually been taking care of myself way better. After that, I just want to bring in two facts. These are facts that the board and the citizens can look for themselves. There is a statement by the creator of the PCR RT test, Karen Mullis, and he openly stated before passing away that this test is not used to identify or diagnose infectious diseases. It's a manufacturing tool used to amplify the amount of DNA and RNA within a sample that is taken from a living organism. It has nothing to do with identifying infectious diseases. Now, as for this coronavirus or COVID-19, it has never been isolated, purified, and identified using Koch's postulate, meaning there is no live sample of this virus. If there is, I ask the board, anybody to actually prove that there is a live sample of this virus. That's basically all I wanted to point out. This information is readily available on the internet. You can go find it for yourself. I'm not making this up. Lastly, I just want to appreciate the board for not silencing me this time. I actually spoke about a month and a half ago. I attended this meeting and my microphone was actually muted twice while I was talking. I'm not sure who did that, but that actually happened. My voice was silenced 2 times while commenting. So I appreciate you not doing it this time. And I ask that you do some extra research and please reverse this mandate, or at least make it optional, because there is no freedom of choice when you're mandating self-harm, isolation, locking down people. I yield my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have 3 speakers remaining. Our next speaker is coming in on the phone line, last 4 digits 1557. If you'll go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. And you'll have to unmute if you're coming in on the phone.
Disappeared.
Oh, hello? Hello? Okay, Madam Chair, I don't know that the hand went down and he or she doesn't seem to be available. So we'll go to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Karen Mullins. Ms. Mullins, if you go ahead and unmute yourself, give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Morning, everybody. Karen Mullins, M-U-L-L-I-N-S, Dunedin, Florida. I'm here to say, please keep the face masks. I am not happy with the way that the Sheriff's Department handled this and kind of confused everybody in the forefront of this. Face masks do work. We all know that. Apparently somebody here doesn't understand that. But it's not an inalienable right to harm another person. The virus is not a living thing. It is protein, it is RNA. The second thing that I have is, I know that you as the commission take care of the sheriff's budget. My concern is that in an election year, the sheriff has taken upon himself with our tax money to run a political ad in the form of a PSA. I do not believe that this should happen. These PSAs need to be pulled, and his campaign should be charged for the time that these PSAs have run in the past 6 months. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is Diane Lebedev. Diana, if you go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Okay, am I unmuted now? Yes. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, commissioners and staff. I'd like to just bring up an old bromide, which is the proof of the pudding's in the tasting. And we have had in Pinellas County a remarkable level of success on dealing with the coronavirus. Now, just remember, when you look at the national press, they don't really focus on Pinellas County. There are articles all across the nation about the success of St. Petersburg, which is obviously a result of your actions. You know, when the figures are going in the right direction, keep up what you're doing. It's not time to stop it. If you have any doubts about the legal, which I don't think you do, about the legalities of a face mask, although, you know, people keep on talking about freedom because they don't want to wear a mask. There are numerous legal articles about how legal it is and how it's in the public interest, in the public health, and that you're free to make this kind of determination that a mask is mandatory. Now, I just want to add, I have COPD, I had World Trade Center exposure. I have a problem with the mask, but every time I go out, I wear a mask. It does protect me, although very slightly. It protects everybody else in the community. And that, I think, must be our goal. So I'd like to thank you all for having taken the step that you took, and I would encourage that you keep it up. Thank you very much. I yield the balance of my time.
Diane, just for the board record, could we have your address as well, please? Thank you.
I know so many of you. Diane Lebedeff, L-E-B as in boy, E-D as in David, E-F-F as in Frank, Safety Harbor.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is Valerie. I don't have a last name. So Valerie, if you'll go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. And Valerie, you have to unmute on your side, please. Valerie, can you hear me?
Hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, hi. My name is Valerie Andrus.
You'll have to speak up a little bit, though. Are you far away from your microphone?
Not that I'm aware of.
That's a little bit better.
My name is Valerie Andrus, A-N-D-R-U-S is the last name. My address is 811 Pine Street, Apartment A, Clearwater, Florida, 33756. I'm here to ask you to please take off the mask mandate and make it the decision of people. And God gave us a right to have good minds and to be able to make our own decisions about our health. And I feel that it's very important that we get to keep that right. There are lots of studies. I have something in front of me of 42 peer-reviewed studies of why a mask is dangerous and how it can harm us. There is lots of science that shows that the masks are dangerous and do not help. I agree with the man that spoke a little bit earlier. I think it's very unfair and propagandized that you have these two doctors on here that are only one-sided, and I don't think it's fair or right of you that you do not show the other side. Also, I feel that the numbers are showing that the masks are not really helping because the numbers are going down anyway, and yet the mask mandate is in place. So it would behoove you to please allow us to, as citizens, to be able to make our own choice as to what we feel is best and right for ourselves and our families, and to take away the mask mandate and make it optional. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have one remaining speaker that wishes to be heard. I don't have a first or last name. It just says the Dave. So Dave, and I can't even, he's on an older version of Zoom, so I won't be able to have him on the panel. Dave, if you can call in on our phone line. Don, do you by chance have that handy?
I do. Give me 1 second here.
I'll try to put it up here.
Okay, the number is 669-900-9128. And the webinar ID is 238-247-671. Again, the phone number is 669-900-9128. And the webinar ID is 238-247-671. Brian, I don't think that has the web ID on it. So
No, that does not. I'm sorry, but yeah, that this person had an older version of Zoom. The only way we'll be able to get him is on the phone. Madam Chair, we do have one other person on Zoom that wishes to speak. This is Hillary. I don't have a last name, so Hillary, if you'll go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address.
Hi, my name is Hillary Walbeck, 1721 Lori Lane, Bel Air. I'm sorry, last name spelling is WAHLBECK. I am calling to respectfully ask for an end to this mask mandate. In the research I've done over the past 6 months, listening to respected medical professionals, it is beyond clear to me that these masks are not necessary and in fact have caused more problems than not. Other callers have already mentioned the rapid increase in suicides, domestic abuse, and overdoses. Should people wish to mask themselves, they should be more than welcome to do so. However, when you mandate people to wear a mask, you're taking away our rights to make our own medical decisions, and this is wrong. I'm asking you to please remove the mandate and allow the citizens of this county to choose for themselves. I ride my bike around town every day with no helmet. Maybe it's not the safest choice, but it's mine. Additionally, I'm not sure if your decisions today have any bearing on the Pinellas County School Board, but I would beg that the school board remove the mask mandate for children. Kids aren't getting this disease. There's no proof they spread it, but the school board wants to mask my children. My kids have been in summer camp for 10 weeks with no masks, no social distancing, and have thrived. These masks need to be optional, and I ask you very respectfully to make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, we have one remaining speaker coming in on the phone line, last 4 digits 1557. If you go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your first, last name, spelling, and address, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. Hello?
Hey, this is David Happy. Sorry for all the technology issues I've had
That's
today.
okay.
It's David Happy, 903 Cypress Cove Way, Tarpon Springs. I think that David Eggers is my elected representative. This past Friday, your county attorney stated to a judge in the lawsuit against the county that the mask mandate was temporary. The judge probably should have asked your counsel at the time what temporary meant. You've refused thus far to define what temporary is. You're pushing us towards civil disobedience. I asked a question last week in your meeting and it wasn't answered. It's not really a trick question, but a question you guys should be able to easily answer. So here's what we'll do. I'll donate $100 to the Pinellas County Community Foundation if you answer the question clearly with a specific, quantified, and measurable definitive answer on behalf of the Pinellas County government. And the question is, what is the specific, quantifiable criteria that you're looking for that will trigger a repeal of the mask ordinance? We just need to know what the answer to the question is. Thank you. Your specific and clear answer to this question is expected, and it will be appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, we don't have anybody else left on the list that wishes to be heard.
Okay, then. Questions from, I do have a question about the East Lake budget. Commissioner Eggers.
Excuse me. Yeah, I was going to bring that up under the budget information session just
Okay,
to.
we can wait.
But yeah, just there was a meeting last night, their normal FIXA meeting, and a lot of questions and a lot of emotions came out in the meeting. And I wanted to summarize that and ask the county administrator to perhaps on next week's meeting, when we have another one of these meetings under the budget information session, talk a little bit about the penny and how it's moved or changed from December into the CIP. And I tried to remind everybody last night that that CIP is only for 6 years, that some of them may have been bumped out into the latter part of the penny. It just isn't being shown on the CIP on the website. So anyway, I think there does need to have that kind of conversation anyway. And I think we can do that next week. But anyway, I was going to bring that up in a little bit. So
Commissioner Eggers, I mean, I could address this, because it's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, I understand they had a meeting and now they're coming to the commission, but I have yet to receive a phone call on this. So, I'd be happy to engage with them. I mean, the first thing is we have the design money in for their two of their biggest projects. And so we don't have the construction dollars in, we have the design money in, but that means construction dollars will follow. And so that's part of the programming that we do for every major capital improvement. We have almost all the projects that were on the original 2017 list within that 10-year period. We do have to cut back 6% of our projects. And so that is part of that process. But remember, we're only approving 1 year, and we have a 6-year window, and then that'll change each year. But part of putting in the design means that it's a priority project, obviously, and then there's going to be construction dollars to follow. But be happy to follow up on that. I'd be happy to engage and discuss with them. And concerning the caller, I've actually visited with them and physically looked at each of the projects that they're talking about. So we Barry, be happy to discuss with them on this.
Yeah, I understand that. When you look at what was in the budget in December and what's in the CIP now, it was a $17 million reduction in that period. In other words, projects got bumped out a little bit. There was a $500,000 added for the East Lake design. So again, I know we're kind of speaking in the wrong place right now, but it was significant change. And so they want to be able to understand that better. But I do think there has been some change that we probably need to, again, maybe address so that we're managing expectations. As you said, we're going to have a 5 to 10% drop in projects or project cost. And
but they're not seeing the construction dollars. They're only seeing the design dollars. And that original list hasn't changed from December to now, is what Bill's texting with me on. But regardless, and this may be miscommunication, these are the types of discussions we should set down with them, because we're all on the same page, and so we should meet with them, and to where staff can go through those, and to where we're all speaking on the same page. And if there's an oversight or something, then at least we'll be clear. So we'd be happy to have that.
That's fine. We can do that, Barry. But I'm telling you, they have had conversation at some level on this topic. So it's not like they haven't said anything since December. So I'm just telling you that it's important to them. And I think it would behoove us to have at least some general conversation about it and a little bit about the penny itself and how it's changing. So that's just my opinion. And I'd like to see it next Thursday. Again, we don't have to go through the whole penny, but just to understand a little bit how it's changed, how it's morphed since December. I think it's really important. So. But again, I know that's not where we are right now. So,
okay. So let's talk about the local state of emergency.
Okay, commissioners, the local state of emergency, this will extend the local state of emergency from the 21st to the 28th. You've heard, Dr. Cho, Dr. Jameson, the sheriff, and myself on our ongoing calls. We feel that we need to do the extension. Dr. Cho is here. He can certainly go through any of the numbers, discuss any questions you have. And remember, this is just extending the local state of emergency. This gives us the authority to do emergency purchases and make decisions. The two issues that we have, which are one is through an ordinance. Those are separate actions from the extension. However, they're tied to us, extending the state of emergency. Our numbers are looking good. We're down below 5%. We've consistently been there for a 7-day average. However, we know that continuing these efforts keeps us safer. And you can't, to the caller's question about pointing to exactly what does it take to remove the mask mandate. Well, I think the issue is, when is there going to be a solution to this pandemic? And we have seen since we implemented this and the social distancing with bars, our numbers drop dramatically. And so Dr. Cho's on the line, Dr. Jameson was on the line. The sheriff could not make it today. He had a different call, but we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, Dr. Cho, I do have a question. Given that we've been getting much better, we've gotten an awful lot of calls and emails today about removing the mandate. Personally, I think we have to wait and see what happens when the schools open. That's huge. And I'm just wondering how long, once the schools have been open, I mean, how long do they need to be open and we keep looking at the results before we make some different decisions? I mean, I don't know.
Well,
I'm asking you to predict, but I think we all know that that could be a huge factor.
so with any reopening and what we've seen in the past, really through the pandemic, the effect of a policy change or a reopening, you don't see it until you at least pass one incubation period, sometimes 3 to 4 weeks as well to see the full impact. But beyond that, not just looking at these 1 points, most experts do believe that that we are going to continue to see these ups and downs, these spikes, regardless of some of these reopenings. For example, if the coronavirus acts like any other respiratory virus, we will see another spike when the weather's cool. People are gathered more indoors potentially. Other factors that a colder environment predispose an individual to. That's why we see those upticks during respiratory and flu seasons. So we are going to continue to see this. Most experts believe that we're far from over into both an endpoint, whether it's herd immunity, whether it's the vaccine development. And most experts from the CDC to the NIH, the World Health Organization, Infectious Disease Society of America have recommended continuing those social distancing practices and wearing masks.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure you could actually stay indoors any more than we are right now, but Commissioner Long first.
Yes, and I didn't get to ditto my opinion on what Commissioner Eggers said with regard to the Eastlake issue in the rec center. So thank you for that, Commissioner Eggers. And then secondly, I think it's really important for the folks that are calling in and being frustrated about our mask situation, et cetera, et cetera. Look, all you have to do is look around the world and see what were the measures that were put in place by the various countries and regions around the world where they have effectively been able to manage the spread of this virus. And so for any one of you that may have been able to talk to someone who has had the virus and recovered, it is not pretty. And to say that it's not threatening or life-threatening or any of that sort of thing is just kind of not factual, number one. And number two, I agree with the comments that have been made about our students going back to school. There are examples all over this country of schools that have started and within 8 days had to shut down, send everybody home, go through the school all over again to re-sanitize and try to get rid of what was lingering. So I think being cautious is prudent. And I do agree that getting through a couple of incubation periods before we even think about it is very, very wise. So thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to just hit on a couple of comments from the callers. The first one was a lady named PK. And I would ask Barry if you or Dr. Cho, your team, can look at this because it keeps coming up. She mentioned that she knew 5 people who were in line for a test, were not tested, and then got a call saying they tested positive. I think if we can try to touch base with her and get those names and kind of track down where these people allegedly were and where the testing facility was, I think we need to get answers for that because that keeps popping up and it really undermines, faith in the system that you cannot even get a test and get a positive call. So I think if the board agrees, I think staff needs to try to track that down and get some answers. The second thing, is this narrative of rights and how we're infringing upon rights. And I think folks have it backwards. Number one, If you don't want to wear a helmet on your bicycle or your bicycle, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, that's your right, and you're only impacting yourself. But if you don't wear a mask and you're asymptomatic, then you are endangering the people around you that come in contact with you. And you don't have a right to pass this virus on to other people. And so I think folks have that backwards about this choice of wearing a mask. You wear a mask to protect other people if you're asymptomatic. Another point that keeps coming up is talking about Dr. Cho and Dr. Jameson, and we're very thankful for their advice. But we've also had, and I think Commissioner Long and you, Madam Chair, brought in 3 CEOs from our largest hospitals, from Advent, from Baycare, and from HCA, and they all urged us to keep the mask mandate in place. And from the CDC on down, the best advice from medical professionals who know what they're talking about is that masks make a difference. And I think the numbers have come down, as we've discussed before, precisely because of the mask, because of the social distancing and the other efforts and the community buy-in. And so that's why we're continuing to keep the mask mandate. I just want to reply back to the folks that called in. And I think it's the gentleman who was asking for a specific number. It's when the medical professionals and our public safety professionals look at the situation on the ground in Pinellas County, all the trends, and give us advice to remove that mandate. In my view, that's when we would look at it. But flu season's coming up, schools are going to reopen. I don't think now's the time to move backwards on the mask. And the question I have for Barry, since Commissioner Justice isn't here, but he woke us up on Facebook with his latest trajectory of Tropical Depression 13. Thank you, Charlie. We appreciate that. We don't need to meet again, correct? Because of this emergency order. If you need to do something over the weekend, Barry, what is your plan? Do you plan to call us back together, or just to act based on the order?
Well, we have this will extend from the 21st to the 28th. Joel, I would defer to you in terms of whether we would need a separate order for a hurricane situation or not.
I do think that we would need to have a separate order. The local states of emergency that you all have been enacting for the last several months are all predicated upon findings of facts that relate to the pandemic.
Okay.
It is very important when we're enacting a state of emergency that we do lay a factual basis for doing so, and essentially lay the predicate. And like I said, these are all based upon findings that relate to this pandemic. So I would suggest and recommend that from a legal position that we do need to have a separate one for a hurricane. And to the extent that we do see storm activity or other emergency activity aside from the pandemic, I would recommend keeping the 2 orders separate.
I thought, Jewel, though, that we said when the last storm was coming that we didn't have to do that. Or I'm not remembering that correctly.
I don't know that we ever actually did an emergency with the last storm because it didn't really begin to threaten Pinellas County to the extent that we needed one.
No, but Commissioner, you're right. We did discuss whether or not the current order would give us the authority, to do emergency purchases and stuff. I think Joel clarified it after that.
Okay.
That it would be better to keep the 2 orders separate. So the good part is we can do it via Zoom if we need to call that. Yeah, we would call you back together if. However, that won't happen because it's not going to materialize. But hey,
I love your thinking, Barry.
Yeah, really. Keep that up.
Sure.
Commissioner Long.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Commissioner Welch, for bringing that up about the storm, because I would like an opportunity, Barry, for us to hear and for us to also educate our citizens about the different things that might be the issues that might be different now that we are threatened with this storm in the midst of a pandemic at the same time. I mean, just sharing the information about our shelters, for example, and how that has changed with the result of social distancing and mask wearing and all of that kind of thing. So I do think there are some things that we probably will want to talk about, and I would encourage us to meet again, given that the predictions get any worse.
Well, on Kathy's call this morning, we are in the 5-day cone. So, this is something we do have to take seriously. We could certainly, if this, as I talk with staff, we could, bring the commission back together. But as Kathy talked about before, we have made plans to do sheltering in a different manner. There are state guidelines regarding how we do that. It's 60 square foot per person versus 20 under normal planning scenarios. We have all the precautionary steps necessary to run shelters, including temperature checks, screening criteria, and things like that. So we are prepared. We have plans in place if we need to exercise them.
Okay. Commissioner Peters?
Yeah, I want to discuss the Pinellas Cares and 211. This certainly isn't the first time I've heard that there's been a problem and nobody's getting back to anybody. And when I spoke to you, Barry, last week, you said that we have added staff and we have navigators, and yet we're still hearing this week that 3 weeks have gone by and there's been any kind of response for this woman, and she's not the only one that I've heard from. So can you please tell me if you checked maybe after our conversation last week as to why we still are not having responses for more than 4 weeks at a time or longer? We've been doing this for months now, and all those glitches certainly by now should have been fixed, and we're hearing that they're not.
So we have,
you got everything to talk about that, please?
Well, we do, but we actually, we're scheduling this for next week to have a more in-depth conversation. Staff's been working very, very hard with 211. As you're well aware, 211, there's a number of issues regarding the calls. However, we've also changed that narrative where before we had provided assistance to about $1 million, to the tune of about $1 million. Well, since that time period, as of today, we've put out $6.2 million to individuals through 211. So it is reaching people. However, we have had to add additional staff, and it's a 600% increase. So in approved cases. Now, the issue on the calls, it takes a time period of about, I forget the amount of time off the top of my head, but there's a training period for people that we bring on. We added staff before. We've got additional staff that just started, and they're in that training period. So the combination of that and refining, and I know staff met with 211 yesterday regarding refining some of the procedures to where a caller coming in, actually will, stays on the line. But we're losing people when they call in, and it takes too long, and then they drop off. I've heard those same calls about, somebody that stays on the line. The average is about 15 minutes for a call time. So we have the data and the statistics to tell you when a call comes in and when it's answered. But there's about a 50% abandonment rate, okay, on that. And it goes to that, the point. I don't know exactly what the overall solution is. They're refining that. But I've asked staff to get those types of statistics and data together to where we can have a discussion specifically about 211. But I wanted them to cover all the CARES program and give you an update regarding the business and the nonprofits and the child care and all the other programs that are just now coming online, and they'll have the metrics and data to be able to do that for next week is when I was scheduling that. But to your point, on the we can specifically talk about 211 because I've asked for specific data where we can track how do we, know what improvements are actually being made and what's the data to support that. And again, I gave you just a little tidbit of that, but we'll be in a much better position to have a full discussion on that next week.
Okay, because we set up the text situation. So even if they drop off and they've texted them, they have to have their phone number. So they've got their number, they've got their access, and if she's texted 3 or 4 times and there's not even a response that way. So when you have them present, could you have them present what all the glitches and problems were and what we're now doing as a result of those glitches and problems? Because, between last week and this week, I'm getting inundated with people that are just incredibly frustrated and they're afraid they're going to, you know, lose everything. And so that would be helpful. And I also believe we're kind of skirting the issue that Mr. Happy asked. And I get it. I know school's going to start. When I spoke to the governor personally, he said that he expects at least another 8-week cycle. And I think that's reasonable when school starts to expect that. But I think the public kind of deserves how many incubation periods, how long. I think they expect that and they deserve to have some kind of plan versus, well, every week I'm going to call in because I have no idea. I think people should have some kind of expectation. We should provide it for them. So I don't know if you want to work with Dr. Cho or Dr. Jameson or who, but I honestly believe that they deserve to know where an end date is. And I don't think it's unreasonable to put that together. You know, it's very clear where Pinellas County's vulnerabilities are, very much at the nursing home and the elderly. And no, I don't believe we're through this yet. But I don't think it's unreasonable for us to give them some kind of expectation. We did the emergency order to prepare hospitals. Hospitals are very prepared. And although we had that one cycle where it got a little tense, they've had a reprieve at this point. They can regroup, they're restaffing, rebuying supplies. So how long? And I think it's reasonable for us to come up with a plan. And I would really appreciate it if you would come up with some kind of plan and an end date that we can give the public that they can expect. And I don't think that's unreasonable. And I would really like you to present that next week as well when you do the CARES presentation.
Thank you. Commissioner Eggers?
Yeah, thank you. I instinctively go to unmute myself.
You're good.
I was actually unmuted this time. Well, first of all, I love hearing from our residents. I mean, and I'm glad we as a board wanted to continue these meetings. And I know sometimes they can get a little long, but I do think it's great to continue hearing from folks. And I remember back in June when we talked about this mask ordinance that we did talk about, you know, there's a lot of science and data that goes into this program, going into the mask ordinance. And so at some point we need to start talking about the criteria that we're using. And some of it's quantifiable in a formula, and others is kind of more qualitative. But it needs to be more than you'll know it when we see it. I mean, there has to be something in between that vague of an approach to kind of a combination of data, a combination of the quality. So like somebody mentioned, well, we want to wait for 2 or 3 incubation periods after school's open to see if we've gotten any, bump in our pressures on our hospitals. And I think right now we're using kind of our nursing homes, the COVID nursing homes, to keep those hospital numbers in check, down below where they need to be. So I do think it's appropriate to have the discussion. I mean, our residents demand that transparency. It doesn't mean we're going to change things. It just means, look, we had the detailed conversation going in. I think you don't have to have it every week, but I do think we need to start looking at that because I was challenged, I guess, by a couple of emails that came in, and to like, okay, what would I think, personally? What would I think, or what would I base it on, for me to look at it? And it's not an easy question, I mean, it takes a lot of input from our staff and our doctors, et cetera. So, but I think, Commissioner Peters talked about, let's at least start looking at that formula. What is it that we're going to be looking at? And it may not have an exact formula. To David Hape's point, I guess we won't get that $100 you were talking about. But I do think it is a fair question, at least to be thinking in our minds where that is. And I know staff's been thinking that way too. It's just it's not down into a finite a situation. So I'll leave that alone for now. I was, again, along these lines and along the lines of research and all of the information that's out there. Dr. Jameson was kind enough to take some time with me this week or last week, I can't remember now when it was, but to have a good conversation about just a little bit about the data, about the science that's going on out there, how it's changing, how it's evolving epidemiology-wise, and just in general. And I thought, maybe he could talk a little bit to the difficulties that we all have. I mean, in other words, there's residents out there that they pick up a science literature and they run with it because it supports what they feel, which I get. I'm not criticizing that, but we talked a little bit about trial and error, consensus building, preponderance of evidence, confirmation bias, just a whole bunch of things that we kind of went through, just talking a little bit about, what we have to, what kind of thought process that our doctors are going through. I mean, they are like a funnel. They're grabbing a lot of information and going through it. So, and then bringing it to us, not just a paper, but a paper that's got, many people getting behind it. So if Dr. Jameson maybe could talk to that just a minute. And then I just had a couple of other quick comments.
Sure, thank you. I'll do my best to
I know,
summarize what was a fairly lengthy conversation. But so I think one of the main points is that the process that folks are seeing play out in science.
Dr. Jameson, I can't hear you real well. Could you speak up a little, please?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's better.
Yes? Yeah. Okay. So the process that people are seeing playing out over the last 6 months, I think bears a little bit of explanation, because there is lots of conflicting information out there, and there are lots of different viewpoints out there, and that's normal and to be expected. What people have really been seeing, and I think Dr. Cho has put it this way as well, is science in action. And science isn't always the 100% we know right now truth that we would love it to be. That takes time, and that takes consensus building, and that takes multiple studies. It takes the development of a preponderance of evidence that points us in a direction to what we believe today. Now, the scientific method is something that certainly everybody learns about in school, of having a hypothesis and testing that hypothesis. But we're in a position right now where we need to try to react to what's in front of us and make decisions based on the best information we have today. We don't have the luxury of a 10-year retrospective study to know definitively what the right answers are. And so I know what I've been trying to do is to distill down what's happening as more and more studies are done. There's just an incredible amount of science being done over the last 6 months. And I'm trying to distill that the best I can to give you all a representation of what the overall consensus of, in most cases, people a heck of a lot smarter than me feel about where the data is pointing us. And it's obviously not an easy task, and it's even harder in the setting of something that's evolving in front of us, where we have to make decisions with incomplete information. And this is something maybe that somebody maybe like myself who works in emergency medicine is maybe a little bit more used to than some people. I often have to make decisions with incomplete information, and there's just no way around that. And that's a difficult thing to come to terms with. But what we have to do is try to make the best recommendation we can to you all based upon our best interpretation of what's out there at this point. And what's out there may change, and it likely will change over time. We've seen it change already. We've seen people's impressions about masks and whether they're useful or not change significantly over the last 6 months. And that's probably part of where the concern comes from, is that when you hear one thing and then you hear another thing, it tends to make you question what might be going on and what might be the truth. And that's been a challenge for all of us during this, as we've seen our knowledge evolve and continue to evolve on this topic. And I tell my medics all the time, if the science changes, we'll change, but our responsibility is to do the best decision we can today for our patients based on what we know. And so that's what I've been trying to bring to the discussion, and I think Dr. Cho as well. It may not be perfect. We don't have the luxury of complete and exhaustive studies and data, but what we're just trying to give you is our best advice based on what's out there now. And it's not an easy challenge. There's a lot of different stuff out there. There's, you know, probably 2 dozen journals that I'm monitoring for articles on a daily basis. And it's messy, and there will always be dissenting opinions, just as there are on any issue. But we're just trying to sort it as best we can, and knowing that you know, we may not be perfect, but we're doing the best we can.
Well, Dr. Jameson, that was a really good synopsis, I think, of our conversation. And really, I was just more curious about kind of the process that you're going through to kind of sift through that. And there is a lot of data out there. And as you said, it keeps changing a little bit as well. And again, I didn't have that conversation with you to come out with any narrative. I was just trying to understand a little bit. And I thought that maybe residents might at least appreciate kind of the, as you called it, the messiness of this situation. I mean, we're doing things on the fly right now from a science standpoint. And I don't mean us as a commission, but we're talking about the scientists that are out there that do the research, are on and doing their best, and they're working hard to try to play catch up as much as they can. So just two things real quick, and it's a question. If for some reason when we decide to stop the mask requirement, that still gives latitude to businesses and schools, et cetera, to continue their own requirement of mask ordinance, ? And then I would say this masks thing in the context of what we're doing, we can transpose that over to the flus that are out there. And I know one's, you know, very airborne, very, you know, but they're all transmittable by touch or by airborne, even the flus to some degree. And again, I'm starting to get into science, and that's the last place I need to go. But and so there's a lot of cases of flus every year. And so I think at least what I'm seeing is there's probably going to be a group of people, even if we revoke this mask, that wear masks during the flu season, for crying out loud, just because that has been such even with the vaccine, we see huge flu numbers. And, you know, so I think there's going to be, you know, some, you know, again, I'm not talking about a mandate from us, but I'm saying that people will just by choice do that more and more. So that was just a comment, but just a question on the school thing. If we revoke the mask ordinance, can businesses and the school system, a public system, can they continue a mask requirement if they choose?
Yeah, a business can make their own decision regarding, you know, mask or things like that. We have, you know, for instance, in ours, we have exemptions, you know, and that people can exempt themselves, self-exempt. But businesses have said that you can't come into my store unless you have a mask. Well, that's up to them, and ADA and all those other issues. That's a private decision, and it does not have anything to do with our ordinance.
And that's the same with the school system, school board?
Yeah, the school, I would defer to Joel, but they make that decision on their own.
I think we gave them that latitude anyway, right? And they've chose, but I was just wondering if we didn't have a mask ordinance, whether they could create one for their own system. It was just
I would imagine they
I
could.
I agree with the county administrator. He's absolutely right. Private business can certainly impose their own requirements. And in fact, we did have businesses here in Pinellas County that were requiring masks before you all adopted the ordinance. As to the school board, you know, the same rules would apply there. They, you know, absolutely have the right, not a business obviously, but would have the same rights as a private business to impose whatever measures they felt were best needed for the students and the staff.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Seal.
Thank you. So my question when we discuss 211 next week is, we've had very, very few complaints about how the business COVID grants have been processed, and obviously the amount awarded has been quite a bit more. So I guess I would like to compare the process that they've used to economic development versus 211 to see if there is a way to streamline it or duplicate that process. So you don't have to answer it today. It's just for next week. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been asking for that for weeks. Commissioner Long.
Yes, and while I know we have a lot of citizens that are anxious for us to, you know, just take away the emergency order, I do think it's very important that we do not raise false expectations with our citizens. Because if we start telling people in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever, we're going to lift the emergency declaration, and then we're not able to do that for whatever reason, I don't know how you manage that without really making people mad. So I think we have to be sensitive to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Understand we may have people wanting to comment on this, Brian. You're muted, actually.
Sorry.
Gotcha.
That's the first time that's happened.
Yep.
At this time, yeah, if there's anybody that wishes to comment on agenda item number 2, the local state of emergency, please raise your hand virtually in the Zoom meeting or hit *9 on the telephone. And Madam Chair, it does appear that there's one gentleman that wishes to speak, Mr. Dave Waddell. Mr. Waddell, welcome back to the board. Go ahead and unmute and you'll have 3 minutes.
Morning again, folks. So, well, God, it's really hard to know where to start. I've been engaging with you now for about 8 weeks. And back in my engineering days, I was fortunate enough to understudy with a father and son, John Lerbecki Sr. and Jr. And one of the sayings in engineering that I will never forget, and this is 30 years ago, was you want to screw something up, get a human involved. So we all have our variables. On your best day, statistical analysis has proven in the manufacturing environment, you're operating at 94%. Now that is a premium, excellent employee. The average person operates at around between 84 and 86%. And I'm not going to assign any operational skills because we're dealing with so many variables here, all right? This is what needs to be understood. We're learning as we go. Your approach week by week, I think, is a good approach. I want to direct the rest of this conversation to the 2 doctors and to our county attorney, Joe White. Commissioner Karen Seal was nice enough to forward me the information regarding state and local county Department of Health regulations, all right? And I know home rule, I think, trumps, and I believe Dr. Cho represents the state, Dr. Jameson represents the county. I'm still researching those documents, but air quality in buildings gives you the authority of oversight for the schools. Most of these schools have ventilation systems that are very antiquated. And if we don't go in and test these air systems for positive airflow and the consistency of that positive airflow, you're going to have a bigger problem than you could imagine. Children and even young students, as we see at the colleges, are vectors, okay? I mentioned a couple of weeks back about a regional approach, and I do think that since, you know, we got a lot of people commuting back and forth from Hillsborough, we need to look at that. But I did my own study on masks. I went out and I bought a pulse oximetry unit at Walgreens, $40. Oh, by the way, flu shots were available the first week. Everybody in the county that can get one should get one. I got mine on Monday. No problems, only had to wait about 20 minutes. All my information is from the National Institutes of Health. Exposure of 10 minutes or more within 6 feet is a potential exposure. In my training in the military, nuclear, biological, chemical,
Mr. Waddell,
number one rule was you assume everybody is contagious and that you stay in your bunker. But I conducted my own test for my oxygen levels and actually went for a 15-minute walk with 2 masks on, my N95 and my L82. My oxygen level actually increased from 96 to to 98% while wearing my mask and goggles. By the way, goggles, I recommend for everybody because up to 20% of transmission can occur through the eyes.
Dave, your time is up.
Yeah, your time has expired, sir.
Well, the asymptomatics are what I'm really worried about, and there's so many unknowns, and it's the mask type. If you're wearing one of these, what they call a gaiter or a head sock, please, they are not functional at all. The test is if you can blow out that candle, that mask will not work. And we've seen what's happening.
Mr. Waddell, your time has expired, sir.
I know.
Madam Chair, our next speaker, we have 4 other hands that went in the air during that time. Our next speaker is Barbara Walker. Ms. Walker, if you go ahead and unmute yourself, give us your first last name spelling, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Barbara Walker, BARBARAWALKER. I just wanted to say that I agree with extending the local emergency order. And if we end up getting a hurricane, I hope you will do another one for that. I'm the type of person that never wanted to catch anyone's cold even in the first place. And so I'll probably be the type of person that will elect to continue to wear a mask. I understand what Dave Eggers is saying about that. But I think at this point in time, it doesn't look like we should be changing anything and just kind of hang on to where we're at. That's all I wanted to say. I relinquish the rest of my time. I hope you all have a nice day.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is David Katsaros. Mr. Katsaros, welcome back to the board. You'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Hey, thanks for having me. Specifically on the emergency order or lifting it, I think we need to be wise and courageous. And I know that's kind of a difficult thing with all the different information that is out there that Dr. Jamieson mentioned. But this country was founded on calculated risk. The civil rights movement was obtained by calculated risk. The LGBTQ movement was made on calculated risk. The Me Too movement was started by calculated risk. Courage, balance, fact-based information, working together is how we do that. And I think, when I look at this emergency order, this order allows you to purchase things you wouldn't be able to due to budget constraints. Where does this money come from? Who is allowing you to go on these buying sprees? It's me. It's the other constituents. It's our tax dollars. This isn't coming out of your back pocket. This is coming out of mine. You're a taxpayer too. So what are you buying that allows you to buy things that is a part of this emergency order? Okay, yeah, you have emergency order. It allows you to say mask or no mask, but we must take action. I think you need to hear the public. You need to hear more of the public. But I think what I'd like to hear is, what are you buying that you couldn't buy that is outside your budget constraints because of this order? And I think that could be driving the continuation of this emergency order. I think we're all adults. People here can wear a mask or not wear a mask, and businesses should be allowed to open and manage their business. We're killing an economy. We're killing just the livelihood of America, and Pinellas County is a part of that America. And I really feel strongly that we should see data points of what you're purchasing underneath the emergency order, unless I have it wrong, which I could. But from what Commissioner Long was saying, that there's things that you're able to purchase because of the emergency order. I'd like to hear more from you guys on what those purchases are and how you're utilizing our tax dollars for that. And I yield my time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is Jennifer Frazier. Jennifer, if you'll go ahead and unmute yourself, give us your first, last name, spelling, and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Yes, this is Jennifer Frazier again. I spoke earlier on the 211 issue. I just wanted to know if you can display that email address again that you put up earlier, just to make sure that I got it correct.
Yeah, give me one moment, Jennifer. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I did miss one word. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have one remaining speaker. It's Dawn, and I think she spoke before. But Dawn, if you'll go ahead and give us your last name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board.
Yes, Bowler, B as in boy, OHLER. I'm just calling with an observation and a suggestion about the dashboard, the Pinellas County dashboard under the age distribution of cases graph. It has ages 0 to 4 at 255, which would be preschool age. Then you have ages 5 to 14 at 638 total over the past 5 months, which is elementary school to middle school. And then it jumps from age 15 to 24 at 2,000 or 2.7 thousand. And with the concern over schools and everything, when you talk about numbers and scientific factors and stuff, would it not be more logical to break it down from, you know, maybe age 5 through 19, which would pull together the potential school age kids, so there's a more definitive comparison to see what's going on, instead of having high schooler age children combined with young adult children. So that was just an observation on the age distribution of cases while listening to people's concerns with the school and stuff. You don't exactly have it separated on here for school age specific, and I just want to make that observation and suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, there are no other wishes, or I'm sorry, there are no other speakers that wish to be heard.
Okay, well, thank you. In that case, we'll entertain a motion to extend the emergency order another week. Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Seal, second from Commissioner Welch. All in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, Mr. Burton, budget again.
Budget discussion. You asked for a discussion specifically around the EMS levy and the process that we use in making those decisions. Jim Fogarty is on the line, and he is prepared to give you a brief presentation and discuss the way in which they go about making those decisions.
Give me one moment. Jim, can you hear us? You'll have to unmute yourself and share your video, sir. Jim?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, Brian, I'm having difficulty sharing my video. Hang on a second.
Well, Brian, did you put this up?
Jim, I've got your presentation queued up. Do you want me to go ahead and put it up?
Yep, put it up, please, because I'll try to work on my camera if you can put it up here.
Okay.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jim Fogarty, Bureau Director of Safety and Emergency Services. I apologize for the camera glitch. It was working just a moment ago. Of course. Yeah, 2020, all kinds of surprises. What I'd like to do just in maybe 10 minutes is try to give you a behind the scenes look at how some of the decisions are made regarding the emergency medical services system. And I wanted to really set the tone that this is a system and a decision-making process that's been in place for about 5 years. And it's really performed very well over those 5 years. Now, what I'll describe to you is really not the clinical decisions, how the medicine's provided. This is related to the operational decisions, the units, where they're placed, how many of them are there. And really, if I had to describe it, I would describe this data-driven focus group as a very successful, cooperative, cordial process. It's very detailed, and you might be surprised to see the level of effort that's put into this. So Brian, if you could give me the next slide, please. The data-driven focus group is a group of stakeholders. Typically, that's fire chiefs, ambulance contractor, EMS chiefs, the department, the director of fire and EMS, Craig Hare, Craig, myself, and some of the folks from the budget. And they are a group of stakeholders that meet monthly. They spend a couple of hours every month. We just met last Friday. And their purpose is to look at all of the various components of the system, the data, and to understand that data both from a short and long-term perspective. And hopefully to try to understand what's going on with the system and what, if anything, needs to change or needs to be adjusted. The type of data that we review includes the various response times, the call volumes, not only by individual districts, but the agencies themselves. We look at how often multiple calls are received at the same time, 2 or more calls, we define that concurrent calls. And occasionally there's a special study or a special report that we look at that helps with understanding the way the system operates. Now, the data-driven focus group as a group is not intended to speak to any particular agency or their needs or problem. By design, it's really more of a systematic review. And when there are issues with individual agencies, whether that's call volumes that are going high or response areas that are hard to serve, you'll see the district actually meets with the department directly to understand that. Next slide, please. When the data-driven focus group is looking at the data, some of the standards that we refer to, there's a lot of standards, the Department of Health licensing and certification standards, for example, for paramedics and EMTs. But the relevant standards that you're probably most familiar with are the resolutions that were passed back in 2009. And those resolutions really there are 2 of them. One of the resolutions defined what we're allowed to spend the money on. The EMS fund has very constrained reasons you can spend the money. For instance, you can spend EMS money to buy an electrocardiograph machine, but you can't spend EMS money to buy a self-contained breathing apparatus for a firefighter. You can buy a stretcher for the back of a medic truck, but you can't buy a fire hose. And all of those, what you can spend money on, are described in the resolution that describes reasonable and customary costs. There's another resolution that defines the various levels of service. How much service and how do you measure it? That service in terms of how fast do we get there? Responding to emergencies in 7 minutes or 30 seconds or less, 90% of the time. That's all defined in the level of service resolution. And on the right of the screen, you can see just one page of that resolution that describes how many calls need to occur for how many seats are funded aboard those response units. And just as an example, if there's a response area that responds to 11 or more calls a day, between 11 and 15 more calls a day, that area really warrants 2 people either aboard a medic unit, like an ambulance type of a truck, or those same 2 people aboard 2 single ALS engines. Next slide, please. And then the next few slides are really just some examples of some of the data, some of the charts, some of the graphs that we look at. On the left side of your screen, you see one such chart. Now, that same chart is included in your packet because it's hard to read on the screen, and there are literally dozens of these charts. This one chart here shows the calendar year 2009, and it shows all the various response zones. We call them EMS zones. For instance, the zone that you're holding your virtual meeting in downtown Clearwater is known as Clearwater Zone 45. And we look at that zone and we look at annually how many calls occurred. Last year there, in 2018 that is, there were 13.3 calls in that zone, and in 2019 there were 13.5. There really wasn't a significant change in that zone, but we look at each of those zones independently. And we can do it by calendar year, we can do it by quarter, we can do it by day if we wanted to. For instance, I ran that same zone for yesterday. Yesterday in the downtown 45 zone, there were 11 emergency medical services calls. And so we've got that data available. Towards the right of the screen, you see the concurrent call report. And this is a report, I demonstrate that we can actually do this quarterly. And this is how many calls occur, 2 or more calls at the same time, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 calls come in. Because if you have a zone where multiple calls come in at the same time, of course, one unit in that zone would have a challenge dealing with that. Next slide. The next slide is an example of, again, there are charts and there are graphs and there are maps and there are spreadsheets. This is an example of a spreadsheet that's used. And the fire chiefs and the EMS administrators, they all have access to this data when you put it inside of a spreadsheet. This is an example of the zone statistics, the very similar zone statistics you saw on the map. And this goes back over the course of several years to understand how those zone statistics change. If this was a live spreadsheet, you would also see other worksheets in there. This particular worksheet describes the zones, but there's other worksheets that describes the individual trucks themselves. And any one fire station, you may have more than one truck. And in the case of, say, Station 38 in Largo, you've got 2 trucks in that station. So we analyze not only the zone, but we analyze the truck within those zones. So there's all sorts of these reports. And there's also ad hoc reporting. The individual fire chief could go to the web interface and create whatever reports or information they need based on the issues presenting. Next slide. Again, I said the data-driven focus group meets every month, which we just met last week, as a matter of fact, last Friday. And it's really not correct to say they complete their review, because they meet monthly and they do the analysis quarterly and then again annually. So they really never complete the review. But once a year, typically around January, we do an annual review as the department tries to prepare the budget. And we take that annual review, typically it's in January, and we look at the recommendations. And then we, as a department, start to consider having both provider meetings and doing a fund analysis as a process of developing the budget. Next slide, please. And then the reason for the provider meetings are so we can fully understand as a department the details. And the details are really, the devils are in the details. What is driving the need? If there is a difficult to serve area, sometimes that's because of a bridge that's out, or sometimes that's because of a unique situation in that area. And these provider meetings are generally attended by the city manager and the fire chief, sometimes the budget director of the municipal city, and typically the assistant county administrator, Lourdes Benedict, and I, and then Craig Hare will meet, and we really go through the details of just what's going on and exploring, are there any alternatives that we might consider? We met with, for instance, Treasure Island last year around this same time, City Manager Brumback and Chief Trip Bars. And we wanted to fully understand, because Treasure Island at the time was making the case that they needed a standalone unit down there. And we really understand the details, the access to certain areas in that location, the 4-wheel drive nature of getting out onto the soft sand, the ability to launch boats. And so once we understand the details and we work with them to explore any alternatives that might exist, and sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. And at the same time, we confirm if there are any capital needs. For example, when we met with Station 38, for example, this year, we asked them, the fire chief from Largo, do you have intentions of relocating 38? Is it correctly located? Does it need to, are there any construction projects or expansion projects in the area that would really affect the modeling? Next slide, please. But then we, from there, the department looks at the fund itself, and the criteria that we use when we look at the EMS fund. Again, it's its own separate fund, and the criteria that we use when we do the fund analysis, and we did this back in January. The criteria is that it's a sort of a 6-year view of the forecast period, and this fund itself is designed to always have 25% reserves of expenditures. So if the expenditures or surprises happen, the system will be able to continually operate really without much of an impact with those levels of reserve. And the assumptions the fund is built upon are the various ones you might think: inflation associated with the labor costs of the ambulance contract, what medical consumable supplies escalating costs might be. It's built upon what the property values in the county are, how calls may grow, and then what our revenue collection for our ambulance user fees might be. The principles that we use when we are doing this analysis, that existing costs are the priority. At one time, not all authority approved costs were covered, and there was a transfer of costs. So we had authority approved costs, but some of the municipal cities were actually subsidizing that. That's all since been corrected over the last 5 years. So the existing costs are the priority, and then the ability to expand and make adds to the system really hasn't been changed or compromised, but the ability to contract the system really has. We really have a foundational unit concept, meaning that there's a given number of units that will have to exist even if no calls occurred in our system. There's still a given number of units, and that's known as the foundational unit concept. And then we make improvements to the system when it's prudent and we can afford the recurring costs. Next slide, please. And we did that when we did this fund analysis back in January. This is what we were looking at. You saw this slide back in February when the forecast review was done. I think you're looking at all the fund forecasts every 6 months. And this is what it looked like when we did that forecast. The system has worked incredibly well over the last 5 years. You see the growth of expenditures was well below the growth of revenues, and we were really in sound shape thanks to the hard work of the data-driven focus group over the last 5 years. As a matter of fact, the discussion, and we meet with Bill Berger and his team, and he's assigned a specific analyst to EMS, Jason Miller. The discussion at the time was, holy cow, in fiscal year 26, we're looking at maybe 35% reserve levels, and the board's probably going to have to decide, well, what should you do? Should you consider reducing millage rate? And so it's really been a testament. And you can see that slide in the graph. You've seen it before. And to the right, we've called out the various assumptions that that chart is built upon. Next slide, please. As we prepared the budget, as most of the things in 2020, the surprises that present themselves that you have to respond to, we found the assumptions and its impact, not so much on the expenditure side, but on the revenue side, dramatically changed the picture as we built the budget. And it forced us into sort of a, let's make sure, remember the principles that it's a sustainable fund over the long and short period of time. And so when we looked at this, and then we looked and met with the providers themselves and considered the ads. We created the budget that you had before you, which essentially does not recommend any ads to the system. And it's a very well researched, very well founded recommendation. And you might notice, Brian, can you go back between this slide and the last slide? You might notice in fiscal 22, in January, when we look at this slide, our expenditures were right at about 142,000. Next slide, please. And we took immediate actions to try to reduce and constrain expenditures to the extent that made sense in anticipation of maybe a period of challenge that the fund might experience on a go-forward basis. At the same time, we took some efficiency steps in terms of our revenue collection piece to try to improve the collection and revenue flow associated with our ambulance user fees. So you see in this slide compared to the other one, revenue is up slightly and expenditures are down slightly. But the slope of the expenditure curve really has not changed. And final slide, please. And so here's the history of, it's really a story of success. Over the last 5 years, there's been multiple millions of improvements made to the EMS system. We've made improvements from Tarpon Springs down to St. Petersburg and everywhere in between. Just last year, St. Petersburg and Gulfport, Treasure Island, Palm Harbor, Pinellas Park. It's rare that a year occurs where there's not improvement made to the system. But based on the not only the forecast that we see, but when we look at the operational data, the call volume data, we're seeing a reduction. We're predicting a 7% reduction in call volumes. Right now, we ran numbers for what we anticipate 2020. There'll be 10,000 fewer EMS calls in 2020 than there were in 2019. And for that and several other reasons, we don't recommend improvements over this next fiscal year. And that's the end of my presentation. I'll entertain questions you might have.
Why would you predict a decline in EMS calls? That's a pretty significant decline.
It is. Now, we've been seeing declines in EMS calls. For instance, in 2017, we had 180,737 calls. We instituted a few pilot projects around growth management. We did falls prevention. We did some outreach. They were small, and we really can't confirm that was the reason that 2017 had more calls than 2018. But 2018 had fewer calls than 2017. We added a couple of growth management strategies in 2018, and lo and behold, 2019 had fewer calls than 2018. I would say the 2020 reduction in calls is most likely related to the very dramatic decrease in activity, people staying home, the stay-at-home order we had, folks that are not out in their community, perhaps maybe folks not seeking medical care. Again, we're 3/4 of the way through the year, and based on that and then projecting on an annual basis for the rest of the year, That's what we're anticipating, that there'll be 10,000 fewer EMS calls. And that includes ambulance transports. Our ambulance transports are also down by about 7% year to date.
Thank you. Commissioner Long?
Well, I just wanted to give a shout out to Jim and Craig Hare and Lourdes and all of the folks that have been working on this particular issue for so long. I can remember when I came on the commission in 2012, this was one area of our budget that was just so totally out of control that I find the progress that has been made to be really extraordinary and just almost beyond expectations. I also think that we have to give a really heartfelt thanks to all of our chiefs that have finally come together and are working together in a very collaborative way to manage their budgets and to ensure that they have a little more of a visionary thought process when they're putting them together. And I'm curious, Jim, if you think that the multitude of local walk-in clinics around the county that the various hospital systems have been putting up have made an impact on the call volume. And also, isn't it true that people are just aging more gracefully and trying really hard to take care and be responsible for their health and well-being? I don't know. I just find this a very, very nice, pleasant surprise.
Well, yes, Commissioner, and I think Dr. Jameson may still be on it, and I'll allow him to voice an opinion on the impact of the standalone emergency clinics. But I do want to give the shout out to all the fire chiefs, the amount of effort they put into making sure the system is properly. First, they make sure that when the bell goes off, their units are available to respond. But they also look from a long-term perspective and do some things. There was a fire chief in South County, you probably recall his story, that had escalating call volume at one of the senior living facilities, a rather large senior facility, and within a year was able to drop that call volume by 17%, just with some very sensible interventions. There was another facility in Dunedin. There was a facility, a smaller senior care facility in Dunedin. And last year alone, in less than a year, they were able to drop their use of 911, particularly related to falls, by 24%. And I can give you the names of those facilities, but probably in the public, probably not worth doing that. And there's story after story after story like that. And they're as different as the communities are. What works in one community doesn't necessarily work in the other. But we're partnering with the fire chiefs to be able to do that. And I think there's more to do in that area. But having said that, there's also some limits. There's some sort of upper limits to how effective that can be. And the system's designed so when capacity needs to be added, we'll be there, recommending to you to add capacity if and when necessary. And I see Dr. Jameson's back on.
So before Dr. Jameson speaks, if I could just follow up, Madam Chair. So Jim, did you see that during the enormous call volume that I thought had gone up terrifically during the first stages of the pandemic at the adult congregate living facilities, did that not skew the numbers dramatically?
Well, I think, I'd have to look at the particular facility, but in terms of those facilities generally have high call volumes anyway, based on the nature of the people in there. Ambulances are coming and going routinely in most of these facilities. And then you'll have a particular facility, for instance, if there's a concern of a COVID positive, you saw that, but generally the facilities have been on lockdown and there's not been a lot of visitors. And so in terms of the normal day-to-day operation, as a matter of fact, falls at many of those facilities are down, mostly because the folks can't go from their rooms to, typically they would go eat in the dining room. And because they don't do that and they don't walk down the hallways and they can't trip on rugs, we see fall volumes that are dramatically different than they were last year. And for dozens of reasons, but we could look at particular facilities and give you an answer to that question.
I was just curious because I know that the firefighters especially were in and out of those facilities doing a lot of training and working on the infectious disease protocols that were or were not in place. And I'd just be curious and how that impacted the data that you're talking about this morning. That's all I have, Madam Chair, but just kudos to everyone for managing this so beautifully over the last however many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Eggers.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and again, I'm glad we're having this discussion. Appreciate the input. I appreciate the comments made about our fire chiefs, because we were told back in April and May that the call volume was down dramatically. Most people were sitting at home, and so there weren't a lot of accidents. And I'd hate to use this year's numbers as a basis for too much of anything. There was some improvement clearly with all the programs that they have in place, but that's year to year. This was pretty dramatic, and I would suggest it's probably because people were home more than they were on the streets. But the chiefs and the fire departments have been, heroes, if you will, during this, trying to get our long-term care facilities under control, for sure, and a lot of that community outreach that Jim spoke of. And so, everybody, and by bringing this up a couple weeks ago, I've been on the phone quite a bit with different folks, because you can imagine that, their perception of why I brought it up was wrong. But anyway, they're trying to make sure that I understand the system. So I learned things like growth management. Some people speaking very strongly that this should be a county-wide growth management plan. If you're not in growth management, you shouldn't even come asking for funds from us. And we don't have to talk about that today, but certainly some point down the road, just like to understand. Never knew growth management as it related to EMS. They talked about run cards and how that relates to the growth management and how, departments interact and all that stuff. So there's a lot of system information and it's in that box that you all determine, and everybody to a T, regardless of what they said, were very complimentary on where the system is today versus where it was 10 years ago and even 5 years ago. So to Commissioner Long's comment, they certainly, even the ones that were questioning a few things, said it's about tweaking the system as opposed to changing it anymore. It's really doing a good job. And at some point, I would like to understand those terms that I just brought up, and as it relates to priority dispatch and everything else, because I think that gets to the box that you guys work through to come up with the system. I was not bringing it to talk about anything with regards to the system. And frankly, District 65, or Station 65, but the Palm Harbor District is the one that approached me, because they said that this data group forwarded 3 approved groups, and that there's 3 groups that, and I think we talked about it last time, that were deserving of consideration of all the requests. Those were the 3 that were deserving of consideration based on last year's call volumes that are probably they're probably closer to 15 calls versus 12 calls. But regardless, it was really all about funding. In fact, they were told that it really isn't an operational decision. It's more of a funding decision, and certainly talking to the commissioners or commissioner, whatever you want to do, is appropriate in that it's a funding decision. We're not getting into how the system was built or how it's built or anything else. And that's why I brought it forward. It's interesting that the decisions, and that's what I was going to ask you, and Jim, you answered it, that the decisions for these projects, they're looked at during the year, and they come up for discussion and I guess suggestions in that January timeframe, which clearly showed us in pretty healthy condition, and you commented on that as well. So I would imagine that those 3 would have eventually found their way down the path and things stayed the same for approval. I don't know if there would have been any others. There was a list of 8 that I saw. But anyway, 3 of them were separated out as ones that were deserving of it, of the funding consideration. And I don't know, again, I would assume at that point in time, in the back of your minds, Jim, you had that as a thought. And then as the pandemic wore on and the August review showed a different financial condition, it brought a couple things to mind. One, how conservative are the estimates, and is there room for a half a position and funding half of what these folks are asking for? So that was important to me. It's like, okay, so and so there, even without the asks, the fund has a little bit of a negative balance position going forward. So the second thing I was thinking about is, do we need to address that? I mean, it's not like we want to have a fund that's negative balance going forward with the reserves coming down without even adding positions. So there was two different thoughts on it, but I was bringing it forward because it seemed to me that even with these positions adding, that the negative turn over the next 3-4 years was going to be a little bit more than it was being forecasted, but still worthy of consideration. And that's why I brought it forward. So I guess, these are just comments that I'm making, but I certainly think that we need to take a look at that fund as time goes on. I'd like to understand better how projects are brought forward for consideration when the data-driven group makes its recommendation. I assume it's in that January timeframe, but that they've done everything that they asked to do. I think that the state or Palm Harbor district coming and asking me about it was absolutely within what they were suggested to do, but also it just makes sense. As part of the system, it was their time along with 2 others to get some funding consideration before the turn of the complex. So I guess my question that I would leave with is the downturn in the forecast that I see versus the one, if you fund these 3 positions, is different. And how conservative is the budget? And is there any consideration for half a position, or is that still not under your thought process as being considered? So thank you.
So before Jim answers that, I wanted to just add one bit of clarity. The data-driven focus group really looks at the data and the criteria used. Jim then takes that to the budget side. So that's where they meet. They talk about are there other alternatives, other strategies, and then he formulates that in making his recommendation to you. So just one bit of clarity in terms of the process that they use. Now, Jim, I think you can speak to the issue of whether you or how you come to the decision with not recommending any, and that is being, conservative, like we do with other position requests that are asked, within the county. And then maybe you can just speak to the issue of half a position or not.
Sure. I've been through economic good times and bad times before. I spent 10 years on the West Coast, and some of the reasons that we got through that 2008 really successfully had to do with the initial fundamentals of decisions you made early on in a declining economy. The cost decision that we would make, for instance, with the 3 positions you mentioned, would add $1.2 million a year. But the present value of that decision is $7.5 million over the course of a 6-year forecast period, because each year it's a recurring cost and it adds 25% to the needed reserves. And so it's a $7.5 million decision that would change the profile of the fund. And at the same time, we've got some reason to believe call volume is uncertain. When I say uncertain, that doesn't mean it's going down or going up. It just means that it's uncertain. And I think we can't use 2020 year to date as a surrogate for what it looks like. If we look back the last 3 years, we've got evidence that shows it is declining. We've got evidence to show that, successful interventions, whether that's getting to an ALF, and in the case of many of these, the call volume is driven by the use of the emergency services by these adult living centers. And getting in those living centers with some strategic programs, if we can reduce the call or the impact by even 10% of those centers, it completely changes some of the profile of the need. And so to answer your question, for reasons of funding, but also for really operational uncertainty, the uncertainty of what the programs that we could implement might produce, or what the call volume ultimately, we may find the remainder of this year dramatically increase. We've got the ability to look at that on a daily, weekly, quarterly, or even annual basis. So it remains a work in progress, but I would not recommend we add even a half a seat with the uncertainty we have right now. When I recommend we add something, I'm certain that we need it.
And thank you for that. And Barry, you mentioned the word clarity, and that's what I was trying to say when I made the comment that the work that is first done is by the data-driven group that makes recommendations to be considered for funding, and then Jim Fogarty's group takes that and makes those decisions. If I wasn't clear on that, I apologize, but that's kind of what I wasn't even in that front part of it. It was more in the back part of it, which is talking about funding. And Jim, I appreciate your position on the funding. I will say that these positions that I'm talking about, and I don't know about the two others, but I believe all three requests, the positions are in place. It's not a matter of whether they need them or not. They're working and they're doing it. It's just a matter of who pays for it. Does the district itself pay for it, or does the overarching EMS fund pay for it? And there are criteria that you go through. There's a process that you go through. And clearly those three elevated themselves up from the data-driven group. But obviously because of the situation and timing, it changed. So I guess the only question I would have then is, as we move forward on this, you're going to continue to have other requests being made. And you're going to have those that were still requested last year, of which 3 were brought forward. How are we going to deal with them? And are we going to go through the same process again and get everybody geared up for a new project, and then in February or March say, well, we still have uncertainty, so we're not going to do any projects again? And again, it gets to that fund health of the fund without any request is already in the negative, according to what you said. And so I just think that's maybe another issue that we're going to have to deal with. And again, I would definitely be careful on looking at 2020 call volumes to determine anything. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, but I guess well, first, Jim, I have a question about priority dispatch. What are we calling it now? Growth management. What kind of an impact does that have implementing it? Because I know at least one of these, well, only one of these 3 requests is a department that has implemented priority dispatch. So what kind of a impact does that have? And are we looking at expanding that? Did he go away?
No, I apologize. If I could find a way to get my camera to work, I would, but
that's okay. Yeah,
it's just not going to work. And I actually put a suit on, and you can't even see that I have.
We'll take your word for it.
Let me really, like I say, I don't mean to monopolize the meeting, but when we use the word growth management, it includes, but it intentionally is much more expansive than just priority dispatch. Priority dispatch is sending the right resource to a particular call. The priority dispatch that we implemented in several of the departments, including Largo and Clearwater, did that. That involved who would respond on a 17 alpha, which is a fall that is determined to be non-urgent, non-emergency. And in many of the cases, that particular fall doesn't need resuscitation and really just needs sometimes a ride to the hospital. And so the agencies that have implemented that, I'll use Largo as an example, saw dramatic reductions in call concurrency. The concurrency is when a second call comes in, or a third call comes in, or a fourth call comes in, is their primary response unit tied up on some other call, and we measure that as call concurrency. The call concurrency rate for busy on alpha, which means you're on an alpha related call when this other emergency comes in the case of Largo, dropped 73% in the first 6 months they've implemented priority dispatch. It was similar in the city of Clearwater. It was similar in Wayleman. And across all of the agencies, we saw similar reductions in call concurrency, which means 75% of the time they were more likely to be able to respond to that urgent emergency because they weren't on the 17 alpha call. So that's priority dispatch. The other part of growth management, I'll use by an example. We've got a concept of growth management which is known as complex case. And a complex case are really difficult to manage cases. And Treasure Island approached us with a complex case. They found there was one individual that represented 13% of the entire department's call volume in the month of February and March. And we worked with the city of Treasure Island, and we developed an effective strategy for that. And again, 13% of an emergency response vehicle by one person is a dramatic impact on the community. And we've got, so growth management is complex case. Growth management is priority dispatch. And growth management is also what I'm calling communities of care. Communities of care is a project that it really began in Seattle, and I learned about it out there, where we work directly with the aggregate and congregate living facilities in developing strategies how to make it less likely they would be overly dependent on emergency services. Doesn't mean they don't use emergency services. It just, they're less likely to. And the communities of care approach, we saw that in a couple of centers along Largo 38 is a great example. Largo 38 and their community cares outreach really impacted the call volume in several of those facilities in 38 and 39 and 40th district along the 49th Street corridor. So really, we've got this general approach to growth management. It involves communities of care, it involves complex cases, and it also involves priority dispatch.
Okay, got that. I guess part of my concern about not funding these is that we came from a place where there was an awful lot of conflict about who deserved a unit, who didn't, who was paying for it. And we got to this data-driven process, and now we have requests that are qualified or, you know, that meet the criteria that we set. And I hate to, and we also have departments that are, you know, in good faith implementing these growth management measures. And I hate to see us betray that sort of good faith by not funding them when they meet that criteria. I don't think that's a good strategy. And I understand the fund issues, but I also think that if, you know, we have growth going on in this county, and over time we are going to have more need for EMS services just based on population, then we need to fund that properly. Or we need to go back and look at our whole system and how we decide what gets funded and what doesn't. Because if we're not going to use that system, then we're going to work. I think that trust level is going to deteriorate slowly, hopefully, back to where we were before. So, Commissioner Eggers.
Yeah, I really appreciate your Jim, your comment about, you know, trying to define a little bit exactly what that growth management concept is, because frankly, when I heard it this week, I was sitting there thinking, I was thinking in a totally different arena when I heard growth management. So it was good to at least get educated up on that. And so, yeah, I think there is some merit to the discussion that only 6 of our fire districts have growth management and 12 don't. I'm sure there are, I don't know if they're good reasons or not, but I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons why some are not on it. And if that's something that if we really feel is important to having a county-wide system, which is really what we've been talking about here, you know, again, I just like to make sure I understand why that's so relevant. And again, I don't want to go to the extremes of saying, well, if you're not growth management, you don't get any of the EMS funding. But I just would like to understand better how that conversation is going. Again, not today necessarily, but how that conversation is going among all the chiefs to get together to talk about this. Because, you know, I know it's complex. I know that there's union-related issues and there's other things that come into play. But, you know, again, if we're gonna, if that's really ultimately pretty important stuff, then you know, again, we probably need to think about rewarding those systems. Having said that, that's obviously not been the criteria for the decision making to date. At least the 3 that were brought forward. I know Palm Harbor was not. I don't think I believe they're not growth, quote unquote, growth management. But I just, you know, again, I think, you know, the chair made a comment about the process that we go through, and now that year has kind of come and gone, and now we're going to be looking at a new year And what happens to all those requests that legitimately made I guess made the criteria for funding consideration? Are they first up next year before the next ones come if the funding is there, or do we just kind of start from scratch again? So anyway, I guess we're trying to do the right thing and be fair to all parties, and make sure that everybody continues to have trust in the system, which by and large, everybody I talk to says much, much better than what it was. So thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
So that's all we had for today, commissioners, in terms of the budget discussion. Was this particular item.
So one more question.
Go ahead.
I heard staff's recommendation about this, and I just, again, there's some issues that we've talked about today, and I'm assuming that today and next Thursday, which we could have considered another budget session of whatever one topic or two topics we want to talk about. Would that be probably the last meeting next week before we actually get into the September public hearings?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, and just in considering this request, I also understand that Jim, people can look at the numbers. I learned a lot this week, only because I really never got in detail regarding how this worked, because it was working well. So Jim kind of educated me this week and went through some of this, but also understand that it's not entirely perfect, and so some of the way in which you look at the data can skew whether you're over the line or under the line, and people are looking at that differently. Well intentions, but they're just looking at differently from their perspective. Also time periods that they may look and say this is a trend, when Jim's looking at it in a longer perspective. If he looks at it that way, it's really just the Largo would be the one that meets the criteria and stuff. And so you just need to understand that too. And and he can explain any of those. But yeah, next week we have a budget discussion. Again, our recommendation was that the levy stays the same. You would simply just add cost and not change the levy if you chose to provide one or more of the requested seats.
So again,
we can't really change the levy at this point anyway, can we?
No, you can't. Well, that's right, because we advertise that. That's the reason we said we could make this decision later when we actually discuss the levy, because in fact you wouldn't change a levy at this point. You would have to, because of the increased cost at some year in the future, but that didn't change that. So it's just really, which if you decide to increase one of these, we would simply increase the cost and not the revenue side.
Well, again, I'd like to put in a plug for Largo, just because they have met the criteria 2 years in a row, and that they have been in from the beginning on this growth management issue and working hard to try to implement priority dispatch and that sort of thing. So I think they've done everything they can to bring down the need for the resources, but the need is still there.
So if we can, commissioners, I know, Commissioner Eggers, you had asked regarding the capital budget, and so we'll have some more information for you next week on that. I would say at that point, then the commission you can make a decision. We, kind of have the discussion. Certainly happy to follow up and have any additional one-on-one discussion between now and then. Bill Berger and others would certainly make themselves available, or Jim, regarding any specific questions. And then next week, you can make that decision.
Okay,
great.
Commissioner Eggers, did you have something else?
No, I was just going to say, so that was my question. So we'll have this topic for any revisit that we may have. It may be a short conversation, and we'll have the penny discussion. I guess those are the two items that I hear on the budget thing so far.
Yes, because I do want to follow up on the penny discussion, and again, I haven't received a phone call from any of them. I'd like to understand and have a specific discussion with Bill ahead of having that time.
Commissioner
Thank
Long?
you.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I don't need this answer today, but I would like to have it for when we have the next discussion on this issue. We've talked a bit today about priority dispatch and the departments that are really working hard to implement that and so on and so forth. But I would be very interested in knowing which one of the departments countywide are not using priority dispatch. I think that's really important for us to be considering as we move forward.
We can certainly provide you that list, and we'll do that. Understand though that we've, and Jim can certainly speak on this, but we've wanted to do this in not a top-down approach. We've put it out there, and we're working with the fire chiefs, working with the city managers, and because there's a lot of different factors that come in to play there, and so that are local, some are political, some are there's tensions between different groups and stuff. So we've tried to take this as a cooperative approach, and then we're sharing the results with others. Here they did it. Here was the result, and we did it in a hold harmless. You don't lose money because you implement priority dispatch, and so that's the way we've approached it. Jim's done a great job with working people, working with folks in terms of that. But yeah, we'll provide that list to you.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
Madam Chair, I think Commissioner Seal had a question.
Yes, Commissioner Seal.
Thank you. So my question is, with the data-driven group, has there been any recommendations to decrease any funding because of volumes?
Jim, you can answer that. I asked that question yesterday, and Jim's that's one of the concerns about adding a seat, to be very frank, because there isn't a process to decrease funding, to take away a seat. Go ahead, Jim.
Let me speak to that a little bit. There's really two reasons that you have emergency response. One of those reasons is for availability, to have them there. So if someone has an event, they can dial 911 and someone will be there. And then the other reason to have it is because you're so busy within that area, you need lots and lots of resources. And so the system is designed, the foundational units that exist in the system are sufficient enough to make sure that even if no calls existed in our system, that there would always be an emergency response unit within a reasonable period of time of getting to somebody request a need. That's called coverage. That's the foundational unit. Generally, that's the way fire stations are placed when your house goes on fire, and that's the way emergency vehicles are placed. And so the discussion about do we need any fewer fire stations, it really is not a discussion when you understand the foundational unit for coverage. We don't close fire stations because call volumes, because someone's house or industrial complex still could go on fire, even though it's never happened before. And so it's really in a home harmless say, well, it's a good thing not to have any fires or emergency medical calls, but if you do have one, there'll always be a unit close by to respond. And so that's why the discussion is how many do we do away with really is not entertained any longer.
Okay.
Just one more question.
Yes.
Jim, I had asked the question about the ones that were recommended, I guess, by the data group this year, and where do they go now that they're not funded? And to Commissioner Gerard's point that at Largo in their case, and I don't know in Palm Harbor's case, but for Largo's case, they've been doing it. They were for the last 2 years. What happens now in terms of next year's recommendations? Clearly, we have the budget thing that will be ultimately considered, but where do you go in this whole, data-driven group thing? Does it just whitewash all previous stuff and you have to build your case again? Or are those 3 that have passed muster before? I guess there's changing data that could make their request different, but maybe stronger or maybe a little weaker, but I'm just curious how that's going to play out.
Commissioner, I guess I can sum it up by saying stay the course. The system that we have in place has been in place for 5 years. We do the analysis sometimes daily, always quarterly and monthly, and then annually. So we stay the course, and we try to make sure we really understand what's happening in the system. In the case of Palm Harbor, for example, In January, it was decided that Palm Harbor would put in a standalone medic unit, a 2-seat medic unit, in place of what, for instance, if you stood in Station 65 in December, you would have seen 2 fire trucks, a squad and an engine. In January, you would have seen 3. You saw this 2-person standalone truck that they requested and we funded to put in service. And the idea was, okay, let's put that in service and wait a year and see what happens, and see what happens not only to the medic unit, but also to the other response units that are in that district. And so that still is the current plan, stay the course. Again, then COVID happened, call volumes kind of are not really reliable in terms of are they going up or down. And so we stay the course. Palm Harbor 65 is still on task to get their standalone medic unit. It's being built. It was placed in service January 7th, I believe. And so there are 3 units up there today, where in December there were 2. And so in the case of 38, again, we look at the numbers each and every month. And if something were to occur next month where suddenly something dramatic would occur in the 38 corridor, we have the ability to add capacity outside the data-driven focus group. For instance, if a bridge would go out, or if there would be some sort of unusual event that would require additional capacity. We do that for special events all the time. So we do have the ability inter-budgetary to make changes to the system. But my recommendation to this point is to stay the course. The data-driven focus groups looks at this every which way it can, and forms well-founded decisions, which is what we have before you.
And that decision, again, in Palm Harbor's case, was even with that medic unit, that they still suggested them and 2 others to come forward for financial consideration. Yes or
Right,
no?
so-
I'm just asking.
Right. So the discussion in the January was to fund, which the EMS system did, $200,000 for a standalone medic unit, which the month and the years before had been 2 fire trucks, because the case was that the EMS system was impacting the fire district's ability to respond to fires. And so we agree with that, it was. And so Squad 65 and Engine 65 was spending so much time on medical calls that it was less likely they could put your fire out. So we agreed with them, and they funded a standalone unit, which has only been in place for several months now. And generally, we try to look at things for a year to make sure we fully understand the impact of doing that.
I totally get what you just said. I was just wondering when that piece of information was used. Was it used before the data-driven group, and they just nonetheless still thought that those 3, that they needed to be one of 3? Or was that done afterwards? Just so I understand how you guys are working. Because I thought when it was done with the data group, you guys looked at it just from a financial standpoint. So I just for clarity, I'm just trying to understand where it breaks. So I'm still not clear. So I get your stay the course, but I'm still not clear where that discussion that you just had occurred. So anyway, thank you for your patience, Madam Chair. Again, I don't want to get into too much of the details, but I mean, this is important. And so that's why I brought it up. Thank you.
All right, anything else? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.